The Hunger by Alma Katsu is one of Stephen King's recommendations. He has this article on Indigo Chapters. Chapters is a Canadian book store that's very popular in Canada. So for Halloween recently, there's this article with 5 recommendations. So I decided I want to read all of them. So The Hunger is one of them. It is about the Donner Party, but they added a supernatural twist. So I'm unfamiliar with the Donner Party, like the story or the, whatever, but I know it devolved into cannibalism. It was like I guess a wagon train of like 90 to 100 people that were trying to go across the America in the 1840s, and they ran out of food and they ended up eating each other, I guess. So this book tries to add a supernatural edge to it. It reminded me a lot of The Terror by Dan Simmons. That book is a really great in-depth look at basically a doomed voyage between 2 vessels, and adding a supernatural thing to that to make it, more haunting and more horror. But I really, The Terror was okay, but The Hunger, didn't quite enjoy this book. There was a lot going on. The book is, let me see, the book is like 370-ish pages, but the real horror stuff doesn't really happen until the last 100 pages, which is a huge mistake. The book spends way too much time developing characters. The first, I guess to say 75% of this book is basically jumping back and forth between 4 to 5 characters. You've got Charles Stanton. He is a 30-year-old man with a haunted past. All the different characters on this sort of pioneer trail are running away from something. Not everyone is, but most people have their reasons for wanting to leave. So that's Charles. Then there's Mary Graves. She's a young woman. There's Letha Donner. She's maybe a bit of a medium. She can hear the dead speak. There's Tamsin Donner. She is a young wife who's really good with herbal medicines, and she's the wife of Mr. Donner, the rich man. Donner Party, right? So they have their own sort of wagon with kids and servants and things like that. And then there's also a few other characters like Edwin Bryant. He is an older man, former doctor of sorts, who gets separated from the group because he wants to do his own thing. There's a young Indian boy. See, that's the thing. There's so many different characters in this book, and they all get like their flashbacks. They all get their storylines. In fact, one of the storylines doesn't even like get... I just realized right now that storyline didn't really come to a head. So, and then there's another character who has a pretty bad fate, and then they have a flashback of them after, and it makes no sense because it's like why have that flashback talking about all this stuff when that character just had a bad fate? And so there's a lot of it feels almost like filler, and it's harsh, but it is. I know there's 100 people in this sort of wagon train, and you're focusing on 5 or 6 different ones. You're jumping back and forth, but there's a lot of it almost feels like a melodrama more than a horror, because I'm waiting for the horror stuff. This is supposed to be like a bone-chilling, blood-curdling read. I'm waiting for that stuff. And then there's a couple of scenes that happen at the beginning, but then they sort of fall to the wayside. They try to do the whole, humanity is the real monster because they're turning on each other kind of stuff. And I've seen that before in the Mist movie, and mainly that's the biggest example of the real horror is man, and that's BS, man. I want monsters and stuff. Where's all that cool stuff, And that didn't happen. The first real horror attack doesn't happen until about 280 pages into the book. But then the book also does a really bad thing where it jumps perspectives and it leaves you in the dark. And not in a good way, it'll jump from one character and then another and then another, and kind of not show you the horror, but maybe just hint at it, the aftermath or whatever. And yeah, it felt really vague. There was no clear, us versus them kind of thing. It was just kind of everyone's hungry, everyone's starving. And there's a lot of moments where they're like, oh my God, we're running out of food. And then it's like, oh, but he came back with food. It's fine, or, oh man, we're running out of food. We kill that cow and eat it. We're fine, why make food such a big deal if you're just going to find it later? In The Terror, they didn't have food, and that's why they devolved into cannibalism. And same goes for this book, but the supernatural part of the book doesn't really seem to affect the main storyline, you know? It feels like it's kind of there on the back burner, and it's not like the main focus of the book. And I really dislike that, because, you know, when I'm reading a horror book, I want to be scared. I don't want to know about all these people and their past lives and why they're running away and why they're, you know, haunted and all that BS. If that's not going to have anything to do with like the situation they're in, it doesn't really matter, you know? Like, you know, like, it's just like, it's really unfocused. And there's a lot of, like, obviously there's a lot of research and stuff, like in the index at the end, you know, she read so many books to write it and all this stuff. But, like, you know, there's obviously a lot of research and groundwork based off real people, new characters and things like that. But there just wasn't enough horror aspects of this book. And that kind of killed it for me, you know. I'm expecting, you know, some set pieces in there, and you're getting a lot of flashbacks and a lot of, like, characters sort of talking and stuff. And a lot of it just didn't really grind well with me. I mean, I did read the whole thing. I was interested, but I was sort of waiting for that big thing at the end, and didn't happen. And you know, there's types of horrors that are like that. There's, you know, horror stories that are so subtle that, like, it stays with you, like the movie Hereditary, or, you know, The Babadook, which is more of a metaphor for grief. But this one just, I don't know, it left me feeling cold, and not in a good way. It wasn't that scary. I wasn't really scared the whole time, you know. They didn't really focus on certain aspects the right way, you know. They glossed over a lot of stuff. And, you know, once they started separating the large group into smaller groups, they could have focused a little bit more on the horror, but they didn't, you know. It felt kind of rushed. So overall, The Hunger is kind of a disappointing read for me. I can only give it a 2 out of 5.